You're watching a More Beautiful World podcast with Susan Renee, a channel for those of you with open minds and courageous hearts who are looking for guidance on your trauma healing and personal transformation journeys. Here, I share with you the powers of intentional plant medicine use, along with other holistic therapies and spiritual guidance to guide you on your path forward. I'm so eager to share with you what I've learned in working with these sacred plant medicines on my own journey, including the knowing that what we do to heal ourselves, we do to heal the whole collective. Join me as I share my experiences, knowledge, and wisdom to guide your trauma healing so you can transform your life, and so that together we can create the more beautiful world we all know is possible. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of A More Beautiful World. And in this episode, I'm going to discuss the importance of finding your balance in interdependence on your trauma and anxiety healing journey. As trauma survivors, we often develop survival mechanisms for us to feel safe as we experience relationships. This usually shows up as either codependency or as hyper-independence. And sometimes we swing the pendulum fiercely back and forth between the two ends of the spectrum. Today, I want to explore with you how to find that balance point in the swing, the balance point called interdependence. So if you're ready to learn about where you might be operating in your relationships as a trauma survivor, and you're eager to deepen your healing journey and connect into the benefits of interdependence, then this episode is for you. I want to begin today going back a little ways to a reminder of really why this podcast was started. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that we historically as beings have been operating in our society out of this story of separation, right? Where we are alone, we are isolated, we are separate beings. And with this podcast, A More Beautiful World, I have been encouraging all of us to move toward the story of interbeing. Right? And the story of interbeing is understanding the deep connectedness of all things and how we are all one, and how what we do for one, we do for us all, and recognizing this deep connection between all of us, between the plants, the animals, the humans, right? Our Pachamama. So in this story of interbeing, I feel in coming from the story of interbeing and the reason this whole podcast was created, I feel in stepping into that story, a big part of that is stepping into this interdependence and finding this balance point and finding our power in interdependence. So with that little premise, what is interdependence? Right? And I see it as being able to be both self-reliant and to be open to receive support from others. It's understanding that we are all connected and there is this beautiful flow of giving and receiving to connect us in this universe. Interdependence is also the idea that everything in nature is connected to and depends on every other thing. So you see why it so beautifully fits into the story of interbeing. Interdependence really is, being in mutually beneficial relationships where you are dependent on each other, but it's in balance. And it's with the common goal of continuing to strive and to thrive in life. Now, to help clarify interdependence, because I do see it as a balance point on the spectrum, and the spectrum is, on one end, severe codependence, and on the other end, it is this hyper independence. And again, I see interdependence as the balance point of the spectrum, and with that, I feel it's important to acknowledge both ends of the spectrum so we can further and better understand the balance point. As trauma survivors, as I mentioned earlier, two big survival mechanisms are these severe codependent tendencies and these, severe hyper independent tendencies. As I've experienced it myself, I've seen both sides of the spectrum fully, and I have swung fiercely myself to both ends of the spectrum. And honestly, I'm still working on finding the balance, and that happy little medium balance point and not swinging the pendulum, between the two ends. And luckily today, my pendulum does not swing to the extremes, but it still moves a little bit. And maybe it will always move, but knowing where the balance point is, I feel, is so important. So, to get to know this balance point of interdependence more thoroughly, let's start with looking at both ends of the spectrum. And the first end I want to look at is codependency. So, what is codependency? You've probably all heard of it, and there are a lot of different interpretations of it. But I pulled in a few to help us understand in this podcast. So, codependency refers to an imbalanced relationship pattern. In this imbalanced pattern, one person is assuming responsibility for meeting the other person's needs. It can also be defined as a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person is assuming the role of the giver, where they sacrifice their own needs and they sacrifice their own well-being. And codependency is usually rooted in dysfunctional and adverse and traumatic childhood experiences. An example there, some children take on inappropriate, emotional or household responsibilities in order to survive a traumatic upbringing, and that causes the child to neglect their own needs for the sake of someone else's. So that is codependency. It can, again, be as the giver, right? Assuming the role of the giver. It can also be on the reverse, and assuming kind of the role of the taker and assuming that, life owes you something or the relationship is, meant to satisfy all of your needs. And so it can be the reverse side of the coin. Okay, so now we understand one side of the spectrum a little bit more. We understand the codependent end. Let's shift and look at the hyper independent side. So, hyper independence is a way of coping with life for those who have experienced interpersonal trauma. And those who are hyper independent, you do not rely on others to accomplish things. You do not ask for help, and you often avoid receiving support whenever possible, even if it's to your detriment. So hyper independence is like this armor that we put up to protect our hearts from vulnerability, to protect our hearts from abuse or neglect or betrayal or loss, or abandonment or disappointment. It's a definite protective mechanism, lever that we may pull. And in that, you may see, hyper independence show up in work situations as well, where you don't want to delegate tasks and you want to do everything yourself. You always have to be the doer. It's tough for you to delegate. And again, it can come up in relationships where you actually isolate, from your partner, isolate from others, or maybe you just stay, single forever because you feel like you can do it all yourself. Again, I feel it's important to note that both ends of the spectrum are a result of being a trauma survivor, right? These are trauma responses. So when we are working to heal trauma, and the anxiety and the depression symptoms that, our trauma can bring, this is a huge root issue to work on in finding the balance point, right? This balance of the interdependence on your healing journey. So with now that knowing, right? All right, our goal is finding the interdependence. We know what both ends of the spectrum look like. I want to share a few personal examples of how codependency and hyperindependence have really, showed up in my life and part of my journey, as I've been, on this journey of healing the trauma, healing the anxiety, really understanding more about ourselves, I think is critical for the journey. And so hindsight is always 2020. So I'll share with you kind of in my looking back where I've seen, the codependency tendencies show up, where I've seen some of the hyper independent tendencies show up. And then we'll kind of explore together ways to find that balance point of interdependence. So again, looking back, hindsight is always 2020. We get so much clarity when we can look back and have a more expanded awareness to put different perspective and different lenses on our journey. So when I think about my past, and especially in past relationships, and I look for codependency, and some traits in that vein. I can tell you I spent many, 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 many years in codependency. I think it was probably, I know it was deeply rooted in my childhood as a survival mechanism. It carried with me into my teens, into my 20s, and pretty much right about into like 30, 31. So I spent most of my life in the codependency side of the spectrum. And what it really looked like and showed up for me as was always seeking love from others in a relationship, being a like super duper people pleaser, over giving all the time, always sacrificing my own needs in relationships, and then also feeling resentful. When I didn't get what I wanted from my partner or my friends or, my parents or, other relatives, right? So this really, when I look back, it showed up in so many ways across so many different relationships. But for me, I found it so prevalent in coming through in my romantic relationships and always seeking love, from others and giving and giving and giving and giving so much just to get a little bit of love from them. And when I was doing that, again, now that I look back and can see it clearly, I didn't see all of it while I was going through it, but I would sacrifice time with friends for romantic, partnerships and relationships. I pretty much would go into like tunnel vision with my romantic relationships and do everything for my partner. And I would lose my social life. I would do nothing outside of that. I also the codependency really showed up for me in sacrificing my work. So when I stepped out of, corporate America and was doing my own business, it takes a lot of discipline to run your own business and to show up for yourself. And I would easily neglect my work, neglect showing up for myself, for my business, because of relationships. I remember one relationship that I was in, we lived, about like 45 minutes to an hour apart. And I would always end work early and, try to beat traffic to get there to see him. And I always left my work on the table to drive to make it to see him. So it was just sacrifice after sacrifice. I poured out tons of money into relationships, be that experiences with the partner or the giving of gifts. It was always give, people please. And it was super depleting. So when I finally recognized, and I knew of codependency and I knew that was a big part of my story, and I've been in and out of therapy, throughout my life. And it was when I was in my earlier 30s, I was in another round of therapy and I was really diving into this codependency and what this looked like and how to start healing it. So I saw very clearly, through that healing journey with that therapist, how this was showing up for me and how it was depleting me. So, because I'm an intense person and I like to swing pendulums really far, I like to do things fiercely. I swung from this codependent tendency all the way over to hyper independence. So let's talk about what that looked like. Hyper independence for me pretty much looked like fuck everybody. I'm going to do this all by myself in every aspect of my life, in, personal relationships, in friendships, in romantic partnerships, with family. I was in a state of, I don't need anyone's help. I am strong. I can do this on my own. I can be healthy. I can be successful. I can take care of my own sexual needs. I can do it alone and I can do it all by myself. Yeah, I'll tell you, it didn't work. But I know for me, a lot of that huge shift came and was rooted in my deep-seated abandonment issues that I have from childhood. And so it was not a space I operated in long, because while codependency was very depleting, cutting myself off from everything and everyone was also insanely depleting. And more than depleting, it was lonely. It was lonely as fuck. I remember even like I wouldn't, ask for help from friends. Or if they even offered help, I'd be like, no, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. I can do it on my own. Getting offers to help in business or help to collaborate. No, I'm good. I'm doing my own thing right now. It really was a lonely existence. And luckily, I didn't stay there for very long. But the reason I now see why I operated there is because of the abandonment issues and this like armor, right, that I was putting up. If I don't let anyone in, then no one can abandon me and no one can disappoint me. And I knew, I had been codependent and I didn't want to, be an overgiver and give myself to anyone because I didn't want to be depleted, right? So I swung the other way. And the problem here was really that I shut myself off to receive any love, to receive any support. And again, it was very lonely, created a lot of deep loneliness. And probably, now that I'm really reflecting on it as I'm recording, that is probably the time in my life I was most depressed as well, at least in my adult life. So with that, I think when we're hyper independent, we shut ourselves off so much to receive, right? To receive the love, receive the support. And that is just as draining and just as unfulfilling as being codependent. If you want to learn a little bit more about my story with being cut off in that space and cutting myself off from receiving, my Wachuma medicine series, I cover that because it was a big lesson for me that came in during that plant medicine journey. But back to codependency, hyperindependence, and finding that balance point of interdependence. Right? So our two ends of the spectrum, they both have their roots in the story of separation. In seeing yourself as a separate being and being cut off from the gorgeous love energy that we are all a part of. Seeing yourself, as needing, that love energy from others, or cutting yourself off completely from receiving love energy from others. Right? It's that big shift in the pendulum. So we look for the balance point. And the balance point lies in interdependence. I see that as fully stepping into the story of interbeing and finding out and recognizing and realizing that we are all connected and that we are all, at the end of the day, we're all just love. And you can both, give love freely, receive love freely, and be love as you operate in relationships, be it romantic partnerships, be it with family, be it with friends. You can be love and give love and receive love. And there is this beautiful balance point that you can have where your cup is full and overflowing, and you can give from that overflow. Again, interdependence is creating these mutually beneficial relationships where you are dependent on each other, but it is in balance. And it is where you can work to continue to strive and thrive in life together. All that's great stuff. But how do we make that happen? How do we find that balance point? And I'll be honest, as I was preparing for this recording, I don't have a perfect answer. And I feel this is really about exploring your own journey, right? We all have different stories. We all have different trauma we have been through. We are all at different points on the spectrum. And because we're each at different parts on our healing journey and we're on the different parts of this spectrum, it can really take so many different paths of unfolding for our healing to transpire and to find this balance point of interdependence. Though I have a few suggestions for you and a few things to review, because it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't leave you with something to consider or think about or help you on your journey. To get started, I feel and believe so fully with so many things that I talk about here. It first starts with the awareness of where you are at. You have to know where you are currently before you get to go on to the next step. And so if you haven't checked it out, I've got an episode on expanding your awareness. And I think it's so important with any change you want to make, right? Get the awareness around where you're at right now. Hopefully the beginning of this podcast has helped you expand your awareness on where you might be at on the spectrum. Next, when you have the awareness of where you're at, this needs to be met with a deep desire to find that balance point of interdependence. And with that desire, I feel you need to be able to see the benefits of interdependence, how we can do more, when we work together, when we operate out of this story of interbeing, when we understand what we do for ourselves, we do for us all, and in collaboration, and in this free-flowing balance point of giving and receiving, that's where the magic really comes in. As I was feeling into interdependence, I actually had a memory come back from one of my college professors, and I honestly don't know his name, don't remember, and I honestly don't even remember what class it was, but he was talking about synergy. And I remember he always would say, remember, synergy is 1 + 1 = 3. And at the time I was like, oh gosh, okay, old guy, I don't know what you're talking about. Doesn't make any sense to me. But, I feel like that really captures this interdependence, right? And having this mutually beneficial relationship where you're working together to strive and thrive in life. Because when we can add more to the equation, by simply finding this balance point, right? Because anyone would say, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, what if 1 + 1 = 3? What if you can create more by working together, right? And operating in the story that we're all connected and what we do affects, everything and everyone around us. And open yourself to the flow of love, to the giving and the receiving to come into your life. So again, I think once you have the awareness, of where you're at on the spectrum. And then you have this deep desire to find this balance point of interdependence and get into a space in your life where you can go into this equation of 1 + 1 = 3 in your relationships, right? From there, you know where you're at, you have the desire and knowing of where you want to go. The next thing is you start to take action, right? You take actions to build yourself to the journey of that balance point, right? To finding that. And again, this is where I think it could look different for everyone. Actually, I know it's going to look different for everyone depending on your situation. I mean, first and foremost, it's going to depend on what side of the spectrum you are on, right? Are you on the codependent side? Are you over on the hyper independent side? Are you somewhere in between? Are you leaning toward one side? Hey, maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I think I got this interdependence thing down. I have my balance point. Kudos to you. Let me know because I'd love to hear your journey of how you got there. But wherever you are in the spectrum, right, that means it's going to look different for how you move toward the balance point. And it's also going to look different, whether you're single or if you're in a relationship or what stage of life you're in, if you're working, if you're retired. But regardless of where you're at on the spectrum or where you might be at in your life, I feel there are a few general principles I can share to help you in navigating toward that balance point. So some, which I'll call out, are more for codependency. Some are more for hyper-independence, and some work for both. So let's wrap up this podcast talking about some of these general guiding posts to help you find that state of interdependence. So if you have found yourself, as we've explored in this podcast, more on the side of codependence on the spectrum, I would highly encourage you to do an inventory of your closest relationships and ask yourself, do you find yourself feeling like you need, or like they need you to function? Or do you need them to function? Is there a big reliance on that relationship? And if you find that the answer is yes, and you can see some imbalance and some sacrificing of needs on one side or the other, then start making changes in the relationship, start having conversations, start doing the work. Or if you don't want to put in the work on that relationship, it might be one to consider letting go of. Again, be it a friendship, be it a relationship with a family member, be it a romantic relationship. If there is a sacrificing of needs on either side and you don't want to be in the codependent space, either work to make changes on it or let it go. Now, if you're over on the hyper independent side, you can also take an inventory of your relationships. But on this side of things, I would look at maybe the relationships that you've kind of cut yourself off from. Look at the relationships of friends or romantic partners that you've cut yourself off from, where you've kind of declined receiving their love or receiving their help or receiving their support. And look and see where your helpers are, and see who is out there who is one of your supporters or promoters or your cheerleaders or someone who would be there for you if you let your armor down, if you kind of stepped away from the hyper independence, and take an inventory of those folks. And from there, I would say for my hyper independent folks, practicing asking for help. So again, if you have recognized you're in this state of hyper independence and you find yourself saying no all of the time, no to help, no to love, no to support, start saying yes. And before you even answer, take a little pause and ask your heart if it would truly like and desire the help. And if you take that pause, your heart's probably going to tell you yes, because it's tired of doing things all by yourself or all by itself, right? And, again, this has been a big part of my healing this year in accepting others, and their offers to help. It can be hard, to trust that and not even just receiving help, but asking for help, right? Because it can be really hard, to open up our throat chakras, to open up that energy center and to communicate and vocalize our needs. So if you took your inventory of your people, know who could be available to help you, know who your biggest supporters are, and start there by asking for help. And take some of the burden off your shoulders. You don't have to do it all alone. There are so many people who love and support you who would be more than willing to help. Now, on the reverse, maybe if you're on that codependent side of things, maybe you need to start saying no more often. Instead of saying yes and taking offers for help, maybe you need to start saying no and put up some boundaries. So if you're in a constant codependent giving mode, and maybe you've attracted some energy leeches, some people who are always asking things of you, then maybe your work is to start saying no and setting boundaries. And if you can identify where you are depleting your energy and in what relationships and in what ways, putting up those boundaries to kind of cut off this excessive giving, right, can be a very beautiful way to start replenishing your energy and to start protecting your energy. So saying no is okay, right? Especially if it's a full body fuck no, you say no. Okay. So all of that is kind of general. It's a starting point. Again, these are, this is a very gray area, but there is one thing that I feel I could apply to every single podcast, but I do feel really called to share it here in this one, as you're working on finding this balance point of interdependence. And that is take this journey wherever you're at and take it into some prayer work. I am going to have an upcoming episode about prayer work and deepening your prayer practice and your devotional practice, because it can be truly magical. And I'm really excited for that episode. But for now, I want you to know that simply praying to spirit, to the universe, to God, to nature, whoever you want to pray to, okay, praying to find this balance point is critical. Because when we pray, we are putting our focus and our attention on healing this. And that alone will open you up to flow into the energy of healing and to start, for the universe to start giving you opportunities to find this balance point of interdependence and move toward it with more grace, with more joy, and with more success as well. So more to come on prayer work, because that's going to be a whole episode. Though know and trust when you're working toward anything in your life, getting into a devotional prayer practice and putting that focus and attention on it in a ritualistic, daily way can be a game changer. Again, this is not a black and white issue of finding our balance point of interdependence. There really is a lot of gray area here. And I do hope and trust that as you journeyed with me through this episode, and we've done some exploration together, that you have come to understand yourself more deeply and maybe where you've landed. And you can see, as a trauma survivor, what side maybe you're operating out of or leaning toward. But it is my deepest hope that you do at least have a deeper understanding of the spectrum of severe codependency all the way to hyper independence. And that helps you start to find your balance and finding that gorgeous middle point of interdependence. Okay, tribe, let's remember that this is all about making the world a more beautiful place. And that begins with you. Because as you better yourself and as you move through your healing and your transformation journey, as you move through the trauma healing and the anxiety, the depression healing, as you go through all of that, you are beautifying our world. And I thank you so much for that. I hope you found this episode helpful, and I do appreciate you so deeply for being on your healing journey with me. As always, if you need support on your journey as you heal the trauma, as you heal the anxiety and the depression symptoms, or if you want to work on finding this balance point of interdependence, make sure below you go and you grab your free clarity call with me, because I would be so honored to guide you on your healing and your transformation. Well, that is all for today, my dear tribe. Until next time, much love to you all. Hey, tribe. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button below and then click subscribe so you catch future episodes. And remember, I've got lots of free resources for you to learn about the powers of intentional plant medicine use in order to support your trauma healing and personal transformation journey. So make sure you check them out in the description below and help in making this a more beautiful world for us all. Thanks again for tuning in, tribe. And until next time, much love to you all.